Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we're plunging into a collection of stories that really pull back the curtain on the truly unsettling side of human experience. We've got this fascinating compilation of real-life encounters you shared, and our mission today really is to pull out the key insights, the surprising facts, and maybe those chilling psychological nuggets that make these stories so impactful. We're not just, telling scary stories. We're trying to understand the deeper human vulnerabilities these accounts expose.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how these narratives, they seem so separate, right? But they often connect. They reveal these common threads in human behavior, our vulnerabilities, and that thin line, which can be pretty terrifying between what's ordinary and what's, truly extraordinary. We'll be digging into not just what happened, but maybe why these particular events stick with us so much and what they might tell us about, hidden dangers around us.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this with a really chilling account that began online. Specifically, an encounter from a BDSM website over in Germany. Our listener, the person who shared this, had totally innocent intentions, just looking for like-minded people, exploring BDSM, wanting to chat. So he connects with someone, username Mistress Honey, says her name's Yasmin. Attractive profile, seemed really keen to teach him. But, like you often hear in these situations, the red flags, they started kind of subtly. Yasmin was just never available to meet up in person. Always an excuse.
That initial unavailability, especially when it's paired with this really enticing online persona, it's almost a classic psychological setup, isn't it? It sort of builds anticipation, maybe even makes it feel like a challenge, draws the person deeper into that digital illusion before anything real happens. It creates this space, this vacuum that the predator can then just fill with their own twisted reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then suddenly this abrupt invitation, a secluded farmhouse, like a 30-minute drive out, really rural area. He gets there, sees this tatty-looking farmhouse, and even though he has this terrible feeling, like deep in his gut, he sees the blinds part upstairs, female eyes looking down. So he goes inside, and it's pitch black, instantly disorienting. Gets hit with this faint smell like latex and hears this weird, distorted moaning coming from upstairs.
Wow. Yeah, already every single instinct would be screaming, get out. That sensory overload, the darkness, the smell, that creepy sound. These are classic tools for psychological manipulation, really. It's all designed to overwhelm you, to make you feel dread and like you're not in control before you even figure out what's really going on.
Exactly. But he pushes forward, uses his phone light, navigating this dark hallway, finds what he assumes is her bedroom. And what he sees in there is just terrifying. Is a cardboard cutout of a woman in the window. The walls are just covered in images of scantily clad women. There's this massive bed with straps and chains, a camera on a tripod pointed right at it, and then on a table, a collection of sex toys and knives. And the moaning, it was just coming from a porn movie playing on a TV, hidden somewhere. What a deliberate, terrifying scene to walk into.
Exactly. Every single detail there feels carefully placed. It's about maximizing fear, establishing dominance without even saying a word. It's pure psychological intimidation. Creating this environment where the victim's already off balance, vulnerable, unnerved, before any real confrontation happens. What's really disturbing here isn't just the online aspect, the predation, but how the perpetrator weaponized the very expectations and vulnerabilities of the BDSM dynamic. That assumed trust for exploration, maybe the willingness to submit. They used all that to craft this trap. It was almost tailor-made. It's like a dark reflection of specific human desires, twisted for these awful ends.
It's just so calculated. And as he's trying to back out, to escape, he looks down the dark hallway again and sees two figures coming out of the shadows, men. One is what he called a gimp, full body suit, terrifying mask, hands bound. The other, the master. And he realizes this is the person he thought was Yasmin. A broad man, wearing a dress, holding a hammer. The gimp figure charges his car, actually rams into the side of it, while the master figure is screaming for him not to escape. He just floors it and gets away. That moment, the sheer panic, that split-second decision. I must have felt like something straight out of a horror movie.
And the aftermath is just as unsettling, isn't it? The police eventually check it out. Turns out the gimp was supposedly a living slave, there by choice for months. All the camera footage conveniently deleted. The police seem to buy their story, and it leaves our narrator utterly convinced that a much worse fate was waiting for him if he hadn't gotten out. The psychological impact is huge. He says he can't even watch films like Silence of the Lambs or Pulp Fiction anymore. That violation, the depravity he glimpsed, it leaves a wound much deeper than any physical scar could.
It really does. Okay, so from that kind of calculated deception by strangers online, let's shift gears. We're now turning to a different, maybe even more terrifying kind of trap. The insidious control that can grow within intimate relationships. How the masks people wear can sometimes be peeled back way too late. Our next story comes from someone who was the victim of a woman named Haruka. The initial attraction was, well, simple enough. Haruka was kind, he said, but also quite pessimistic, low-spirited.
Yeah, that's not uncommon. Sometimes individuals with deeper psychological issues might initially seem vulnerable or sympathetic. It can draw people in, this perceived need for support, and that can unfortunately mask these underlying manipulative tendencies until things are much further along.
Exactly.
Right.
And the control, it started subtly, but then it just escalated. Constant questions about phone calls, demanding proof of where he was, insisting they spend every single minute of weekends together, forbidding conversations, even glances at other women. Then came these really chilling threats. Haruka started saying things like, if you ever leave me for another girl, you know that I'd kill you, right? He knew it wasn't normal, but he said he was still in love. He even tried talking to her parents, but they were just kind of relieved she seemed happier with him.
And that really highlights how hard it can be not just for victims, but for people around them to see the danger escalating. When love's involved, people often rationalize things, dismiss alarming behavior, just hoping it'll get better. And those isolation tactics, forbidding contact with others, demanding all their time, those are classic control methods. They're designed to cut off support systems, make the victim totally dependent.
So eventually he decides enough is enough. He goes to Haruka's apartment. He'd even scripted a kind breakup speech, trying to be as gentle as possible. But as he finishes talking, turns to leave. Haruka suddenly snaps her head up, her face just contorted into what he described as a devilish snare. Not sadness, he said, just pure fury. And with this otherworldly strength, she grabs his shirt, throws him to the ground. Then she runs to the kitchen, just shrieking, screaming threats like, I'm gonna cut your fucking throat.
Wow. The contrast there between his carefully planned, kind breakup and her immediate, just explosive rage. It really underlines the huge cognitive dissonance going on. Her view of the relationship was so warped that any attempt to leave was just met with this primal, violent reaction. It often stems from really extreme attachment issues, a total lack of emotional regulation.
He bolts, leaves his shoes behind, terrified.
Yeah.
He realized she was going for a weapon. He's desperately waiting for the elevator, but she bursts out of her room, knife in hand, looking, he said, like a woman possessed. He stumbles towards the stairs, knowing she'd kill him if he waited. Runs down 5 flights, hearing her screams, I'll kill you, getting louder right behind him. At the ground floor, in this split-second move he thinks saved his life, he ducks into the shadows under the stairs. As she comes down, he sticks his leg out, connects with her shin, heard a crack. She trips, crashes face first onto the ground. He drives away, moves apartments, changes jobs, tells everyone not to give out his new address, didn't call the police, says he feared he'd be seen as the bad guy.
And that decision, not calling the police because he was afraid of how it would look, that speaks volumes about the psychological damage these relationships inflict. Victims often feel so isolated, ashamed, powerless. This case really makes you think about how easily something like love can be twisted into something incredibly destructive, just driven by extreme control and obsession.
But the ending, the postscript, is what really gets you. A few days before he shared the story, he got an unstamped letter, hand-delivered. Inside, just one sentence. I will always be waiting for you. And a kiss mark in red lipstick. So he's left with this ongoing fear, this unanswered question. Was that letter a threat? Or a promise?
That lack of closure, right, symbolized by that letter, it just means the psychological terror keeps going long after he physically got away. It's a truly haunting end.
It absolutely is. It just shows that the impact of that kind of intense psychological abuse, that violence, it can linger indefinitely. It creates this permanent state of hypervigilance. The perpetrator's final act, that letter, it's like a declaration of enduring control, a dark promise that the victim can never really feel free. Okay, from the claustrophobia of that controlling relationship, let's journey outwards now to the isolated mountains of North Georgia. A camping trip took a turn into the genuinely inexplicable. This story comes from the Jacks River Trail. 2 brothers, experienced campers, decide to camp deep in the Cohutta Wilderness, an area they knew pretty well, their rule. Always try to camp away from other people. Around 9 p.m., they start hearing these quiet sounds, like someone sneaking around slowly, just out of sight. Sounded human, they thought, not like an animal. And what was really weird was the sounds seemed to shift whenever they shone their flashlights in that direction, like something was deliberately circling them.
That immediate distinction they made, human versus animal sounds, that's significant, especially for experienced campers. They're usually very attuned to the normal sounds of the woods. It instantly shifts the encounter from, a typical nature thing to something much more unnerving, suggests an intelligence at work.
It really does. And then came the whistling. 2 notes, back to back. Then a 3-4 second gap. Repeated. But it was inhumanly loud. Seemed to surround them, even sounding like it was running in a circle around their campsite. Eventually, the narrator tells his brother, call the police. And then he saw it. While his brother's on the phone, he shines his light towards his own tent, and for maybe just 2 seconds, he sees it. 5 feet up in a tree. Describes it as having long arms, legs, neck, fingers, everything. Long, he says it just launched backward off the tree and vanished. Impossibly fast.
The critical element here, I think, is that specific visual detail, the long-limbed figure, and that persistent, unnatural whistling. These just aren't typical animal behaviors, and they don't quite fit a standard human prank either, especially the description of how it moved. This kind of story really makes you question how we rationalize fear when we're faced with something completely unknown.
But isn't there also that strong human tendency to create explanations, even supernatural ones, when we're faced with real ambiguity?
Yeah.
Could that be part of why this story is so sticky? That need for a narrative, even a terrifying one?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really crucial point. Our brains just crave narrative. They crave closure. And when we don't get it, that void can get filled with some really deep-seated primal fear. It makes the unexplained feel far more potent than, say, a clear, identifiable threat. And the immediate reaction of these guys, seasoned campers, their rule about avoiding people, their intense fear afterwards, it all points to something that felt profoundly disturbing to them.
And the aftermath really tells its own story. The park ranger eventually dismissed it. Said it was probably a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. But the brothers remain deeply traumatized. They don't talk about what happened that night. Neither of them has ever gone back to the Jacks River Trail. Probably never will. It kind of forces us to confront the limits of our own understanding of the world around us, doesn't it? Leaving that lasting mark of terror, of uncertainty, that goes way beyond just a standard animal encounter.
Yeah, that ranger's dismissal, I mean, maybe understandable from a purely logical standpoint, but it completely fails to acknowledge the deep psychological impact of an experience like that. It really underscores how ill-equipped we often are, maybe as a society, to process encounters that just don't fit into our neat little boxes of understanding.
Okay, our final story today. It's perhaps the most twisted, the most tragic. It reveals a really dark truth about bullying, rivalry, and revenge. This was recounted by a woman about a girl named Akatsuki. Akatsuki had an older twin sister, but Akatsuki was always seen as the less able one, comparatively. After one summer break, intense bullying started at school. But the bullies were clever. They avoided leaving visible marks. What made it truly shocking, though, was that Akatsuki's twin sister was often present during the bullying, just staring coldly, without a flicker of emotion. Akatsuki ended up hating her sister even more than the bullies, simply because her sister seemed to be enjoying her life so much, while Akatsuki suffered.
That initial dynamic, it just sets up this incredibly painful psychological situation, doesn't it? The twin sister's apparent indifference, or maybe even enjoyment, it transforms the bullying into this profound betrayal. It makes the sister's presence almost more damaging than the bully's actions themselves. That kind of internal familial betrayal is often far more destructive than cruelty from outsiders.
The violence kept going, escalated. At one point, Akatsuki was nearly drowned during an attack. She got tired, saw only one way out: suicide. She wrote a note. But then she asked her sister to meet her on the school rooftop. Akatsuki describes her sister leaning against the railings, almost, she felt, as if asking me to push her. And without hesitating, Akatsuki threw her sister off the roof. She then framed it as a suicide, using the suicide note she'd written, but placed it in her sister's room. Nobody suspected anything else. The sister was known to be quiet, rarely laughed. Suicide seemed plausible to everyone.
The sheer desperation that could lead someone to do that, it's almost unimaginable. And the fact that Akatsuki perceived her sister as somehow asking to be pushed, it speaks to a complete distortion of reality. A mind just pushed beyond its absolute breaking point by relentless torment. This case really makes you consider how individuals who seem like victims can be driven to commit extreme acts when they're pushed too far.
But the devastating reveal came later. Akatsuki went back to class, nervous, but hoping the bullying would finally stop now her sister was gone. The leader of the bullies, this girl with chestnut hair, she winks at Akatsuki and says something like, "What, did you think we'd take pity on you? If you want us to stop, you're going to have to make a contract, just like your sister did." And the bully explains. They were bullying Akatsuki's sister first. They only stopped because the sister agreed to pay us off and choose a new victim instead.
Akatsuki herself.
Oh my God, that twist, that horrific revelation. That's where the story just completely unravels the layers of human cruelty. The sister wasn't indifferent. She was suffering too in her own way, making this desperate, awful bargain that ultimately led to tragedy for both of them. Completely transforms how you see everything that led up to that moment on the roof.
In that instant, Akatsuki understood everything. Why the bullying started when it did. Why her sister was always there watching. Why her sister had been leaning on those rooftop rails, maybe looking like she wanted to be pushed. Maybe her sister had been in greater pain than Akatsuki all along. Akatsuki just blanked out then. The next thing she remembered, she was being hauled into a police car, covered in blood. She reflected later, the human body is a very fragile thing, the damage you can do to somebody with just one pen. She was deemed mentally unstable. And it just leaves you with this chilling question of who was truly suffering more, and the absolute tragedy of that cycle of torment.
This story, it unveils such a harrowing truth, doesn't it? That extreme, prolonged suffering can completely shatter the very idea of victimhood. The profound insight here isn't just about distorted perception. It's about how that relentless cycle of torment can actually transform a victim into a perpetrator. Not out of some inherent malice, but as this desperate, tragic attempt to reclaim some kind of agency, even if it means destroying another life in the process. It really exposes the hidden depths of cruelty, sometimes even within families.
Okay, well, let's try and unpack this a bit. We've covered quite a range today. Everything from that digital deception, the insidious nature of online predators, to the terrifying escalation of control in relationships, the unsettling quiet of the wilderness and those encounters with the truly unknown, and finally these profound, devastating betrayals within families.
Yeah, and these stories, they're all so different in setting and circumstance, but they share these common threads, don't they? The vulnerability of human connection, how easily it can be exploited, the insidious feature of control, the absolute terror of the unknown, and of course the lasting psychological scars left by these extreme events. They really remind us that true fear often lies not in, monsters under the bed, but in the darker corners of human experience and maybe the limits of our own understanding.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Perhaps it's a reminder, first and foremost, to trust your instincts, to be aware of the masks people can wear, both online and off, and maybe to always question what might lie beneath the surface. Sometimes the most terrifying realities are the ones we can't easily explain, or maybe the ones hidden in plain sight all along. It's about being informed, right? Not just about what scares us, but maybe starting to understand why it scares us.
Exactly. Knowledge is always most valuable when it's understood, maybe even applied. There's always more to learn. And considering multiple perspectives, especially with unsettling accounts like these, it really enriches understanding, sharpens that critical thinking.
We really hope this deep dive into these unnerving true stories has offered you some powerful insights, perhaps even a new perspective on the things that go bump in the night, or, as we've seen, sometimes in broad daylight. Thank you so much for entrusting us with these incredible, powerful sources. We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay well informed and keep those critical thinking gears turning.